I thought she betrayed me, but the truth was far darker. She tried to take her own life because of me. I never imagined it would end like this. 3 years. 3 years of love, laughter, and promises. Emily was my world, strong, vibrant, full of life. We talked about our future together, about marriage, kids, growing old side by side. I thought we were untouchable, that nothing could tear us apart. But one night, everything changed. It started like any other evening. Emily had just finished her shift, and I had promised to pick her up from work. But she insisted she could handle the short walk to the parking lot by herself. I always trusted her to be independent, so I waved her off with a smile. What I didn't know was that this would be the last time I'd see her in the same way. I'll never forget that call. The phone rang and my heart stopped. It was the hospital. Emily had been attacked. I rushed there as fast as I could, panic clawing at my chest. When I arrived, I was stopped at the entrance. Emily's family was already there. I thought I could at least talk to her, comfort her, but instead, I was met with cold silence. They'd locked the door to her room. "You can't see her," her mother said, her voice icy, distant. "Not yet." No explanation, no comfort. Just the brutal reality that I was no longer part of her world. For 7 days, I was left in limbo. I didn't know if Emily was okay, if she was hurt, if she was even still the woman I had fallen in love with. Every moment felt like an eternity. And then, finally, after a week of hell, Jessica, Emily's sister, called. "Emily will contact you soon, but not yet," was all she said. But Emily never called. I don't know why I kept waiting. Part of me knew that I wasn't going to get a call, but I kept hoping, praying, that things would somehow go back to normal, that the woman I loved would come back to me. But deep down, I knew something had shattered that could never be fixed. Finally, after a week of silence, Jessica reached out again. She said Emily was ready to see me. I didn't hesitate for a second. I rushed over, heart pounding in my chest. I thought this would be the moment, when I could hold her again, comfort her, tell her everything would be okay. But when I walked into her house, I knew right away things were different. Her mother blocked my path at the door, her gaze as cold as ice. "You're not to touch her," she said, her voice firm, controlled. "No hugs, no kisses. You're here to say what she wants to hear. Don't ask questions." I stood there, frozen. What had happened to Emily? What happened to us? And then I saw her. Emily, sitting in the living room, but she wasn't the same person I knew. Her eyes, empty, distant, looked past me. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me. There was no warmth, no smile, no love. The woman I had once shared everything with was gone. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't her boyfriend anymore. I wasn't even a part of her life. I had become a stranger in a house that used to feel like home. I tried to speak, to reach out, but the words felt hollow. I wasn't allowed to ask why. I wasn't allowed to hold her. I was just a guest in the place where I used to belong. The silence was deafening. I couldn't let go. I refused to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I'd shared so many beautiful memories with, was gone for good. Even though Emily was a shadow of herself, I convinced myself that she just needed time. Time to heal. Time to forget what had happened to her, to come back to me. I threw myself into learning everything I could about supporting sexual assault survivors. I read books, attended support groups, and even spoke to therapists. I knew the signs: denial, emotional numbness, avoidance. But what I didn't understand was how much of her was truly lost, and why the longer I waited, the more distant she became. I thought, maybe this was just a phase. She would snap out of it. She would come back. But the weeks turned into months, and the silence grew. Emily's family continued to keep their distance from me, treating me like a stranger in my own life. I started to believe that the Emily I had known was really gone, erased by the brutality of what happened. But then, one day, Emily reached out to me. It was a simple text, almost like a ghost from the past. "Want to meet for coffee?" It was like a ray of hope piercing through the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe this was her way of telling me she was ready. When we met, I had all these emotions running through me: nervousness, hope, excitement. But the moment I saw her, I knew something wasn't right. She was sitting at the table when I walked in, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes downcast. I sat down across from her, heart pounding in my chest. "Emily," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm so glad you called. I've missed you." She barely looked up. Her eyes were fixed on the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, absent-minded. There was no spark, no warmth, no recognition. She wasn't the Emily I knew. "I've missed you too," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was almost robotic. She was there, but not really there. It was as though her soul had retreated to some place I couldn't follow. I reached for her hand across the table, but she pulled back slightly, her gaze still avoiding mine. "I can't be with you right now," she said softly. "I need time." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Okay, I understand." But inside, I was falling apart. This wasn't just a break. It wasn't just a pause. It was a slow erasure. The Emily I had once known wasn't returning. She was slipping away, piece by piece, and I was helpless to stop it. The weeks that followed were just as painful. The texts I received from her were empty, mechanical. "Good morning. Nice weather today." The kind of messages you send to an acquaintance, not the person you love. There was no more warmth, no more late-night talks, no more shared secrets. She was a ghost of the woman I had once held in my arms. After 4 long months, I couldn't take it anymore. I suggested a dinner. It was a small hope, a small chance to bring some semblance of normalcy back into our relationship. She agreed, but only after consulting with her therapist. The night of the dinner, I arrived early, my heart in my throat. I waited, trying to keep my nerves at bay. When she finally walked in, I could see it immediately. There was no sparkle in her eyes. No smile. She looked cold, distant, like she was physically present but emotionally miles away. I greeted her with a soft smile, but she didn't return it. She sat down without a word, her hands folded neatly on the table. "How have you been?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. She looked at me then, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Don't ask me personal questions," she said sharply, her voice cold and controlled. I froze. It felt like someone had slapped me across the face. This wasn't the woman I knew. This wasn't Emily. The rest of the dinner was suffocating in its silence. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt like talking to a wall. Every word I spoke was met with indifference. When the meal was finished, she stood up immediately, ready to leave. "Wait," I said, almost desperate. "Can we just stay for a little longer?" She didn't look at me, didn't respond. But I saw it in her eyes. The fear. She was afraid of me. I saw it clear as day. She recoiled from me, like I was some sort of threat. A part of me wanted to break down right there and beg her to stay. To tell her that I loved her, that I would wait forever for her to come back. But I didn't. Because I knew, deep down, that the person I loved wasn't standing in front of me anymore. She turned and walked away without another word. I sat there in the empty, quiet restaurant, surrounded by warm lights and soft music, but my heart was colder than it had ever been. I had lost her, and I didn't even know how to begin finding her again. I had spent so many nights convinced that time would heal her, that all the emotional distance, the coldness, the silence, it was just a phase. That one day, Emily would come back to me. Every week we would meet for lunch. A small step toward normalcy, a flicker of hope in the emptiness. But it never felt the same. It never felt like we were truly together again. I could see it in her eyes. Her smile was a little more frequent, but it was forced. Hollow. Her laughter, if it even came, sounded like it belonged to a different person. I didn't dare push her. I didn't dare ask for more than what she was willing to give. No holding hands, no hugs, no "I miss you" is. Just silence, and the occasional words we exchanged that felt like we were strangers playing at something we once had. I told myself that she just needed more time. "Patience," I kept repeating. "She'll come back. I just need to wait." But one day, everything changed. It was a typical day. We had lunch plans like we always did. I arrived at our usual spot, waited for her. More than 30 minutes, maybe 40. But Emily never showed. I texted her, thinking she was just running late. No reply. I called her over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic began to claw at my insides. Something felt wrong. I tried to convince myself that she was just busy, but deep down, I knew something was off. I called her parents, hoping they'd know something. Her mom sounded off. She was vague, dodging my questions. "She's just resting," she said, her voice tight. But then she said something that froze my blood. "Don't expect to hear from Emily for a while." I hung up, feeling like the walls were closing in. I couldn't breathe. What the hell happened? For the next 2 weeks, there was nothing. No calls, no texts. Complete silence. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to feel. She was slipping away and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. And then, one day, Jessica, Emily's sister, called. I could hear the guilt in her voice as soon as I answered. "Ethan, I think you should know," she said, voice cracking. "Emily, she slept with someone else." It was like the ground opened up beneath me. All the anger, pain, confusion, it hit me all at once. What? Why? How could she do this? The woman I loved, who hadn't touched me in over a year, had been with another man. I had spent that whole time waiting, trying to hold on to some version of her, believing that she'd eventually come back to me. And now she had given herself to someone else. I was angry, more than angry, betrayed, devastated, broken. I couldn't understand it. She could sleep with him, but she couldn't even hold my hand? I had spent all this time, this painful year, thinking I was doing the right thing, waiting for her. And she did this. The patience, the waiting, it all came crashing down. A few days later, Emily reached out to me, asking to meet at the therapist's office. At first, I was numb. I didn't know if I was ready to hear what she had to say, but something inside me knew. This was it. I needed to hear the truth from her. I needed to know why. I walked into the therapy room, and there she was. Emily, sitting across from Dr. Carter, tears running down her face. She looked fragile, broken, but I couldn't feel sympathy anymore. Not after what I just learned. Dr. Carter looked at me, her expression apologetic. "Emily has something she needs to say," she said, her voice calm but stern. "She needs a safe space to do it." I nodded, but I could barely breathe. Emily wiped her tears, looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and began to speak. I slept with someone else," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lose you, but I did something stupid. I'm so sorry." Her words sliced through me. I had suspected it, but hearing it from her lips, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond. I laughed, bitterly. "So you could sleep with him, but you couldn't even hug me? You couldn't let me hold your hand? You couldn't even tell me you missed me?" She flinched, her eyes filling with more tears. Dr. Carter quickly interjected, trying to soften the blow. "Ethan, this isn't about betrayal in the way you're thinking. This is Emily's way of trying to regain control over her body after the trauma." But I didn't want excuses. I didn't want explanations. I looked at Emily, my eyes cold and unfeeling. All I had left was rage. "You want me to understand, but I can't. You want me to forgive you, but I can't. Not after this." Emily collapsed into the chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Carter tried to calm things down, urging me to stay, to work through the pain. But I had nothing left to say. I stood up, heart cold, throat tight. Before walking out, I turned back to Emily, my voice low and calm but sharp with anger. "If you truly loved me," I said, "then don't contact me again." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the woman I once loved, but who no longer existed in the way I remembered. I spent the night in a haze, drowning my pain in glass after glass of whiskey. I didn't care anymore. The ache was too deep, the rage too consuming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face, her broken, tear-streaked face, apologizing, explaining. I had loved her more than anything, more than anyone. I had waited for her for a year, clinging to the hope that she'd come back to me. But what did I have now? A hollow shell of the woman I once knew, someone who had given herself to another man while I was left in limbo, waiting for a love that would never return. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. I wanted to punch the walls until my fists bled to make all this pain go away, but no amount of anger or alcohol could erase what had happened. No matter how much I screamed, Emily was gone. And I was stuck with the wreckage of our past. I couldn't go back. I knew that. But something inside me, maybe guilt, maybe some small thread of hope, kept me from walking away completely. I wasn't ready to give up. But could I stay? Could I forgive her? Could we ever be the people we once were? I knew I couldn't answer those questions now. So I decided to do what seemed the only way out. I wrote her a letter. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't a way to make things right. It was a goodbye, a final statement. Because deep down, I knew that if I didn't leave now, I'd only keep hurting myself. And I couldn't do that anymore. I spent hours trying to write the words that would make everything clear, that would make this final step easier. But no words felt like enough. How could I express all the pain, all the betrayal, all the love that had turned into something else? How could I tell her that I loved her enough to wait, but that love had died a slow death? The letter was short, but it was all I had left to say. Emily, I've loved you more than anything in this world, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep waiting for something that's never coming back. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't keep hurting myself either. You need to find yourself again. You need to heal, but I can't be the one by your side anymore. Goodbye. I sealed the letter in an envelope and sent it straight to Dr. Carter. I couldn't bear to face Emily. I couldn't stand the idea of looking into her eyes and seeing the same guilt, the same pain I had felt the moment she admitted to being with someone else. So, the letter would do. It would be the last thing I said to her. I didn't want to leave it all hanging. I texted Jessica too, telling her that I was walking away, that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep being her backup plan, her emotional crutch while she figured things out. I needed to get out, for my own sanity, and for the possibility, no matter how small, that I could find some peace. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. 2 days later, my phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Jessica. Her voice was frantic. "Ethan, you can't do this," she cried, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Please don't leave Emily. She's been through so much already. She can't lose you too." I froze, clutching the phone tighter. "What the hell are you talking about?" I snapped. "I already sent the letter. It's over." I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. Then, Rebecca, my sister, spoke up from the background. She wasn't one for picking sides, but her words were clear. "You've been through hell, Ethan, but Emily deserves another chance. Don't leave her like this. Don't make this the end." I felt a rush of confusion and guilt wash over me. I had been so sure. I had made my decision. But now, with Jessica pleading with me, with Rebecca's pragmatic yet heartfelt appeal, the certainty I had felt just hours ago was slipping through my fingers. My chest tightened. Could I really leave? Could I leave after everything she had gone through? After all the moments we had shared? Could I just walk away, knowing she might never forgive herself for what happened? Knowing I might never forgive her? I didn't have an answer. I still didn't know what to do. But what I did know was this. If I stayed, things would never be the same. Could I go back to being the man I was before all of this? Could I forget the betrayal, the emptiness I felt in her touch, the lack of trust that now clouded everything we had once shared? Would I ever be able to look at her without seeing what she had done? Could I really love her again, knowing that a piece of her was lost to someone else? I had no idea. But the part of me that wanted to fight, that still cared for her, was fighting against the part of me that was done. Done with the waiting, done with the hurt, done with the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. I was torn in two. My heart ached for her, for the girl I used to know, the girl I used to love. But the pain was overwhelming. How could I fix this? How could she fix this? "Just give her one last chance," Jessica urged, her voice softening. I wanted to shout, to tell them all that they didn't understand, but I was too exhausted, too broken. The only thing I knew for sure now was that whatever I chose, it wouldn't be easy. There was no easy way out. Either I walked away and closed the door forever, or I stayed and faced the unbearable weight of what had happened. The door was closing. I was closing it, but I wasn't sure which side I should be on. I thought I had everything figured out. I thought the worst was behind me. But that night, when Jessica knocked on my door with Emily beside her, everything changed. I wasn't expecting what came next. The two of them stood there, and I could see Emily's face, pale and tear-streaked. Jessica didn't waste any time. "There's something I think you need to know," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't know what to think. My heart pounded in my chest, and my first instinct was to push them away, tell them to leave. But I could tell that whatever Jessica was about to tell me, it would change everything. Jessica handed me a worn, old notebook. I immediately knew what it was. Emily's therapy journal. I had never been allowed to see it. In fact, I'd always wondered what was inside it. She'd kept so much from me, kept so many things hidden. Now, standing there with Emily, I couldn't help but feel like I had been kept in the dark for far too long. I hesitated before flipping it open. But when I saw the 2 pages marked with sticky notes, my fingers trembled. I forced myself to turn the pages. When I read the first page, it felt like the world had fallen out from beneath me. I learned the truth of what had happened that night. The night I thought Emily had betrayed me. The truth was so much darker, so much more complicated than I had ever imagined. The first entry in her journal detailed our first meeting after the attack. Emily had felt like I was looking at her like she was broken, like she wasn't worth loving anymore. What I didn't know, what she didn't tell me, was that I had acted coldly on the advice of her mother. Emily had thought I was rejecting her, that I saw her as less than the woman I once knew. That was why she started pulling away. That was the moment I lost her. Then, the second entry hit me like a freight train. The night at her office, the night I thought she'd cheated on me, wasn't what I thought at all. It wasn't her choice. She wasn't willingly with that man. He had used her. He had taken advantage of her when she was alone in that break room. She couldn't fight back. She didn't scream, didn't struggle. She froze, just like she had that night with the attacker. And when it was over, when the man finally let her go, all she could think was, "I didn't stop him. Is it my fault?" That was the thought that plagued her. That was the guilt that consumed her and drove her to the edge. And that night, in her desperation to escape the pain, she tried to take her own life. She swallowed an overdose of sleeping pills. If Jessica hadn't found her in time, I wouldn't even be here right now. Emily wouldn't be here. As I read those words, my chest tightened, and the air in my lungs disappeared. I had misunderstood everything. I thought she had betrayed me. But all along, she had been suffering in silence, carrying this unbearable weight alone. I couldn't stop the tears that welled up as I looked at Emily, really looked at her for the first time since we'd started talking again. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" She let out a shaky breath, her hand clenched into a fist at her side. She was crying, but her voice was steady as she answered me. "Because I thought you wouldn't believe me. I thought you'd still see it as betrayal. I thought you'd think I was weak, that I had failed you." The weight of her words hit me like a sledgehammer. I had never understood how deep her pain had been. All of this, the distance, the silence, the emotional walls between us, came from one secret she had been too scared to share. I sat there for a long time, the journal in my lap, processing everything I had just learned. Emily's tears, the pain she had endured, the way she had tried to protect me by shutting herself off. None of it made sense now. The past year had been a year of misunderstanding, a year of pain for both of us, and it was all rooted in fear and silence. I looked at Emily again, and my heart broke all over again. How could I have thought so poorly of her? How could I have let my anger, my own pain, cloud my judgment? I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into my arms, but I wasn't sure if she'd let me. Finally, I spoke, my voice soft but firm. "You should have told me, Emily. I would have listened. I would have believed you. But I can't change the past. I can't undo the hurt." She nodded, the guilt still in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. Now, we stood on the edge of something new, something neither of us had expected. But we both knew one thing for sure. We couldn't go back. The past was gone. I wasn't sure where this would lead. I didn't know if we could fix everything. But one thing I did know, I wasn't walking away. And maybe that was the first step in healing. Maybe now, for the first time, we could truly begin to heal. Ethan stood there, his eyes locked onto Emily's. He knew that love alone wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. It wasn't just about healing Emily. It was about healing them both. The damage they had caused wasn't something time alone could fix. They needed change. I'm not leaving, Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. But from now on, I'm not standing on the sidelines anymore. He took a deep breath, then added, I'm going to be a part of your recovery. If there's a change, I need to know. No more secrets, no more hiding. We're doing this together. Emily's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment. It was as if she was processing everything, weighing the reality of what he was saying. Then, slowly, she nodded. For the first time in over a year, Ethan felt like he was finally on the same team as her. They were no longer living in separate worlds, carrying different burdens. They would face this together, as partners. Emily decided to quit her job, the one filled with so many painful memories. She needed a fresh start. Ethan, ever supportive, suggested they take a self-defense class together. It wasn't just about physical safety, it was about reclaiming her confidence. They started couples therapy, not just for Emily but also for Ethan. He had his own demons to face. Both their families came together, finally letting go of the secrets they had been holding for so long. Emily's mom apologized to Ethan for pushing him away at the start, for making him feel like an outsider. Things couldn't go back to the way they were, but at least now they were starting over. Together. The days that followed were a revelation. Emily began to take more initiative in their relationship. She held Ethan's hand as they walked, a small but significant gesture that showed her willingness to rebuild trust. When she felt sad, she hugged him instead of retreating into herself. One night, after a quiet dinner, Emily sat next to him, her body a little closer than before. Her eyes, once distant and clouded with fear, now looked at him with a new softness. Ethan didn't say anything, letting her decide what came next. Then, without hesitation, Emily leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a tentative, fearful kiss like the ones before. This one was full of certainty, of a love that had been waiting to return. It was everything Ethan had been hoping for in that long, painful year. For the first time in over a year, Ethan felt like Emily was truly back, whole, and with him. They both knew that the road ahead was still long. Emily had so much more to work through, and Ethan had his own scars to heal. But this time, they would walk it together. No more barriers, no more lies. The only thing standing between them now was time, and a commitment to face whatever came next side by side. It wasn't a perfect ending, not by any means. But it was a start, and sometimes that's all you really need to believe that things can get better. This story wasn't just about Emily's pain. It was about Ethan's too. They had lost each other to misunderstandings, to wounds neither of them had known how to address. But through everything, they found one truth. Real love isn't easy to walk away from. The question still hung in the air. Would they be able to keep their love strong? Or was this just a temporary lull before everything crumbled again? Only time would tell. But for now, they had each other. And that was enough to take the next step. And in that moment, that was a future worth fighting for. I knew deep down that just love wouldn't be enough to fix what we'd both been through. There was so much hurt, so much silence, and so many secrets between us. It wasn't just about Emily healing. It was about us healing. Together. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice steady, despite how much I was shaking inside. But from now on, I'm not standing on the outside looking in anymore. I paused, trying to find the right words. This wasn't just a promise to her. It was a promise to myself. I'm going to be there for your recovery. If there's a change, I need to know. No more secrets, no more hiding. We have to do this together. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes not meeting mine. And then, very slowly, she nodded. I couldn't explain how much that simple gesture meant to me. After a year of feeling like I was waiting on the sidelines, I finally felt like I was right next to her, not just beside her in body, but in spirit. Emily made a decision that shocked me. She decided to quit her job. The one where so many dark memories had been made. The one tied to everything that happened. She needed a fresh start. It was scary seeing her take such a big step. But I couldn't help but feel proud of her, and I knew it was time for me to step up too. I suggested something that might sound a little silly at first, a self-defense class. But it wasn't just about being able to defend herself physically. It was about her getting back control of her life, of her body. And I wanted to be there, walking beside her every step of the way. We also started going to couples therapy. Not just for her, but for me too. I had my own wounds to heal. For the first time, we started talking openly, not just about the past, but about our hopes for the future. The biggest breakthrough came when Emily's mom, who had been so distant with me before, finally apologized. She said she was sorry for pushing me away, for making me feel like an outsider from the beginning. Things couldn't be the way they were before, but at least now, we had a shot at starting over. And that felt like a win. The next few days were different. Emily started taking more initiative in our relationship. Little things like holding my hand when we walked together, hugging me when she felt sad instead of pulling away, things I'd been longing for, things I thought I'd never get again. But the real moment came one night, after dinner. Emily sat next to me, closer than she'd ever been. Her body was against mine, and her eyes. Her eyes were softer, warmer. I didn't say anything at first. I just wanted her to decide when she was ready. And then it happened. Without any hesitation, Emily leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative kiss, full of fear like before. This was different. This was a kiss of someone who had come back from the dark, someone who had found herself again. And in that kiss, I felt like she was finally home. After all the waiting, all the pain, all the nights spent wondering if I'd ever get to hold her like this again, I finally felt like Emily had come back to me. We both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Emily had a lot of healing to do, and I still had my own scars to face. But now we were going to face it together. No more distance. No more secrets. We were going to be honest, even when it hurt. It wasn't going to be perfect. Not even close. But we had something now. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. This wasn't just Emily's story, it was mine too. We both suffered. We both made mistakes. We both let fear and misunderstanding pull us apart. But in the end, love doesn't always mean perfection. It doesn't always mean a smooth road. Sometimes it means fighting through the pain, through the fear, and coming out stronger on the other side. So, the question was, could we make it? Could we keep this love alive after everything? Would this be the start of something real, or just a pause before everything fell apart again? I didn't have all the answers, but one thing was for sure. I was willing to fight for us, and I hoped Emily was too. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter.